Hi, I'm Adam Summer. You're listening to the Yerushalmi Talk podcast with the support of the Yeshivat Devar Yerushalayim in Har Nof, Jerusalem. This is Berechot, Chapter 2, Halacha 8, Part 2, and today we're getting into what happens when you degrade or make fun of and mock the Torah scholars. And yesterday we covered a case where Rav Kana had just come back from the dead. Rabbi Yochanan just brought him back, and Hashem brought him back, rather. And somebody was making fun of him, saying, what is the news in heaven? And Rav Kana said that I heard that your fate is sealed. And then the guy passed away, and then he decided to go back to Bavel. We're going to talk today about another story about somebody who recently arrived in Eretz Yisrael who was mocked. Now, keep in mind, all of these stories are stories of people who were from Bavel and made Aliyah. They were mocked, and then this happened, and then this whole incident occurs. So the unusual thing about these cases is that it's all coming from people who recently arrived, Torah scholars who recently arrived in Eretz Yisrael. And that's something that's unusual. Why would that be? I'm not exactly sure why they're only using cases of people who only recently arrived in Eretz Yisrael. Anyway, the Gemara reads like this. It says that when Rabbi Zera came up, he went to let blood for health reasons. In other words, there's some bloodletting, and they cut you a little bit, and some of the bad blood comes out. It was common in the medicine of the day. Gemara is talking about a time when after you're having bloodletting, you're supposed to eat red meat on that day. There's certain things that you're not supposed to do during a day of bloodletting. For instance, I recall bathing in cold water or having relations with your wife. Some of the things that you are supposed to do, you're supposed to eat a lot of red meat. Anyway, so the Gemara continues, says that he went to buy a litra's weight of red meat from the butcher, and the Rabbi Zera said to him, "How much is this litra?" And the butcher said to him, "It goes for 50 denarim and 1 lash." Now, you say to yourself, well, wait a second. Why is it talking about a lash? And what's going on here? Now, the amounts also seem to be interesting. So it's saying denarim. Now, denarim is going to be something that's going to be extremely expensive, and the regular provincial denarim is going to be worth 8 times as much as the regular denarim. So this is just a very unusual reply. Okay. And Rabbi Zera said to him, "Take 60 without the lash," but the butcher would not accept that. And Rabbi Zera said, "Take 70, he would not accept that." Now keep in mind, the Chachamim say that when you get bloodletting for your health, it's really important for you to be sitting there getting red meat. So there's a real health thing going on here. And I don't know why they're using this measurement of money. Perhaps also the butcher's making fun of him for that use of money, or perhaps it's something to do with a translation, or perhaps it's talking about the regular provincial denarim and not the silver denarim. But it's hard to tell, because this is a butcher who's tormenting this Torah sage. So, perhaps he is actually using a measurement that really is 8 times more, or perhaps it's something to do with the text, and we should be reading it as the regular provincial denarim, which is worth 8 times less. But again, nonetheless, he says, when he says, how much is this? He says it goes for 50 denarim. Which denarim are you using? Are you using the more expensive one or the cheaper one? I'm not sure. It could be tongue-in-cheek where he's making fun of him and saying, yeah, it's the more expensive one and a lash. Now, Rabbi Zera needs this meat because this is a matter of serious health, and there's other Gemaras that say that if you get bloodletting and you're doing things like relations with your wife, things like that it's going to weaken you and make you very ill, and it can be very serious. So Rabbi Zera knows he's got to get the meat in order to improve his health. It's part of the treatment for the bloodletting. So he says, take 60 without the lash, and the butcher says, he would not accept it. Rabbi Zera says, take 70, but he would not accept it. And then take 80, take 90, until Rabbi Zera reached 100. But the butcher would not accept. And finally, Rabbi Zera told him, do as is your custom. So the butcher took 50 denarim and gave him a lash. So that's very, very strange. Gemara continues, says, in the evening, Rabbi Zera went down to the study hall, and Rabbi Zera said to him, Rabbis, what is this bad custom that you have here, that a person cannot eat a litra of meat until they administer a lash to him? And they said to him, what is that all about? Who does such a thing, basically, is what he's saying. And Rabbi Zera told him the story. He said to them, so-and-so, the butcher, basically did this. So the rabbis, they sent a delegation intending to bring him before them to be punished if found guilty. But the members of the delegation came across his coffin leaving the building. And the rabbis said to Rabbi Zera, teacher, did you have to be angry with him to this extent that you prompted heaven to deal him death? And Rabbi Zera said to them, let whatever befall me if I am lying, but I promise you that I did not become angry toward him. But I thought that this was simply the local custom. Now, that's a beautiful story in a way, because Rabbi Zera is thinking the best of his fellow Jew. He's saying that this very strange behavior to mock a Torah scholar, this is not something that this guy is doing because this butcher is a Rasha who hates Torah and he's like an Erev Rav. He's not thinking that. He's thinking that, because Rabbi Zera is new in town, doesn't know. He's saying, oh, this must be the local custom. There must be something where if you're trying to eat red meat or something, that they're going to give you lashes. And what a strange custom. He didn't realize that he's dealing with this Erev Rav Rasha who is, hating Torah scholars. Now, it's amazing that Rabbi Zera really did think that this was a genuine custom within the community, and that really does show something for Derech Eretz. And the Vilna Goan, in his Agadas Eliyahu, explains that, in his commentary about this, that the rationale for the practice may have been to impress upon any newcomers to the city that they must now adhere to the community's rules, to the city's rules submissively. So that could have been what was going on. And the Vilna Gaon continues and says that this is like a practice with the army of the Ottoman Empire. A general would strike a newly appointed subordinate on the neck to drive home the point that from then on, the subordinate had to obey whatever the general commanded him. And perhaps Rabbi Zera thought that this was a custom in this part of Eretz Yisrael. Nevertheless, Rabbi Zera thought it was a bad custom, obviously worthy of being abandoned. And the Vilna Gaon points out that in the evening he brought it to the attention of the rabbinic leadership. So this is a case of and a commentary to teach us good derech eretz, that you're not supposed to become angry at your fellow Jew, even if you become embarrassed by him and he humiliates you, or even takes advantage of you and abuses you. That you always try to, think the best, and you always try to give the benefit of the doubt. And this is the derech eretz of a Torah scholar. Now there's another incident. When Rabbi Yassa came up here to Eretz Yisrael, he went immediately to get a haircut since he had been unable to do so during his long journey. And afterward, he wished to bathe in one of the hot springs in Tiberias to sort of, help to refreshen him after this long and exhausting trip. And before he could go to the hot springs, the Gemara says that he encountered a certain jokester. And basically, the jokester saw where he was going and asked him, you are going there to firm up your limbs? And at that point, the jokester gave him a smack on the back of his neck. So that's quite a thing. I mean, the guy's really making fun of him and is really abusing him, and he's even going so far as to strike the great Rabbi Yassa. What an amazing story. The Gemara continues, and the Gemara is saying that the jokester says to Rabbi Yassa, well, that helped, but the neck of that person is still soft. And if you want to firm it up properly, you better go to the hot springs. And the jokester walked away. Now, I want to keep in mind that this jokester is not just a jokester. Now, there's a part in the Torah that talks about Am Yisrael being a stiff-necked person. And here he is, and he's staying, and he hits him on the neck and saying, the neck is still soft. So he's making fun of the Torah scholar because the people that are not religious are referred to as being stiff-necked, and presumably the people that are Torah scholars have a soft neck. So really this is a tongue-in-cheek thing, talking about that verse in the Torah about the stiff-necked people and saying, this Torah scholar, don't worry, he has a soft neck, and if you want to firm it up properly, go back to the springs. And he's basically hinting that you don't need to be going to learn Torah. Go stiffen it up and spend your time to the hot springs. And really what the guy is joking around about is that and again, this is an Erev Rav guy who's making fun of Torah scholars, and he's basically making fun of people who have this sort of refinement that comes from learning Torah. And he prefers this jokester not only to abuse the Torah scholars by hitting them on the neck, but also to be relishing in the fact that he's an Amma Aretz Erev Rav who doesn't want to learn Torah and would rather spend all his time doing everything else like going to hot springs, but rather not learning Torah. So there's a lot of things why he hit them specifically in the neck, and that's really a reference to that idea in the Torah. And he's really drawing a contrast between the soft-necked people and the stiff-necked people, and obviously preferring the stiff-necked people. So Gemara continues and says, at that time, the supreme municipal judge was sitting in judgment of a certain highway robber, and the jokester went to watch and was laughing to himself at the prank he had played. And as he stood facing the accused, the supreme municipal judge beat the robber to get him to confess and asked him, who was with you in the thieving? Basically, he's trying to get out of this robber. Who is your accomplice? And meanwhile, you look at this guy being beaten. And what is this poor guy who's being beaten? See, he sees the jokester sitting there laughing. Now, he's in a miserable spot. Not only is he sitting there on trial, and not only is that, are they, doing a punishment to try to get, all the information in order to bring justice, but in this guy's moment of being beaten, a guy looks over, sees a guy laughing, and he thinks he's laughing at him, at his situation. So the judge asks him, who was with you in the thieving? And amid the pain of the beating, the robber lifts his eyes and he saw this fellow laughing at him, and he assumed he was laughing at him. That's the note by the Yafei Marah, is that this robber assumed he was laughing at him. And the robber said to the judge, this one who is laughing, he was with me. He basically, says the Yafei Marah, is the partner in my crimes. And the judge took the jokester and tried him and beat him. And the jokester confessed to him that he was guilty of one murder. And the highway robber and the jokester were sentenced to death. Keep in mind, a highway robber is somebody that is not just a thief who's going and taking money. He is somebody who is doing physical things like murder to take. He's not just taking the money. He's actually, in many cases, murdering. There's a difference in the halacha between a robber and between a thief. And a robber has a physical assault part of the crime. So the jokester confessed that he was also guilty of a murder, and they sentenced both of them to hang. And the Gemara says that as both of them were going out to be hanged, wearing 2 sets of iron chains on their necks, it was at that time that Rabbi Yasa was coming out of the bathhouse after his bathing. And Rabbi Yasa saw this jokester in chains on the way to be hung. And the jokester said to him, and basically called out to him, and said, the neck that was truly soft is my neck. And it's already been constricted by this iron collar. And basically what this is saying is basically saying, says the Yafei Marah, that the blow that I gave to your neck has already been avenged by heaven. And the Gemara says that Rabbi Yasa said to him, how bad is the fortune of that person? Basically what this is meaning, says the Yafei Marah, is that this punishment is not due to my dishonor because I have forgiven you. Rather, it is because of your cynical humor, and do you not know the words of the prophet? And the Gemara says that, is it not written, so now do I speak cynically, lest your restraints become stronger upon your necks? And that is in Yeshayahu in 28:22. And if you look in chapter in Yeshayahu 52:2, it says Mosre refers to the restraints upon the neck. So he's taking 2 parts of the verse to put it together. He's taking from 28:22, where it says, so now do not speak cynically lest your restraints become stronger, and then taking from 52:2, where it's saying upon your necks. And basically you see here that, hey, he forgave him. And I want to point out something from the Agadas Eliyahu from the Vilna Goan. He says that Rabbi Yasa was speaking out of humility and meant that he was not worthy enough that the jokester should be punished on his behalf. And really what this is trying to show is that cynicism is ultimately going to lead to the death of the cynic. And you need to always stay away from being cynical, and that cynicism, this is trying to show that cynicism is going to be punished with physical suffering, and that the jokester was not merely made to suffer, but he was also put to death. And it's trying to teach us that, when a person is scoffing and mocking, he's embracing some form of emptiness, and in a way he's being like Betul to himself, and he's negating his own being, and basically it brings Tarun, and it brings to your own personal destruction. So that the act of being cynical is something that debases yourself. Now, I want to point out that the sage is pointing out something very key, that he already forgave him, and he's saying something that's not for his own gaiva and his own arrogance. He's saying, why am I to be the cause of your suffering? I'm not worthy enough to cause you to have this, not from my dishonor, right? And he's saying, it's from your character traits of you being cynical. That's what brought this about. And all of this guy's bad derech eretz and cynicism led to this. And this is really a moral story that is trying to teach us that cynicism is ultimately going to lead to the death of the cynic, and that you need to really run away from that kind of character trait. The Gemara is going to talk about another teaching, and it's going to be talking about another point about cynicism. And Rabbi Pinchas, in the name of Rabbi Yeremiah, in the name of Rabbi Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak, says, mockery is harsh. For its inception, its early consequence is affliction, and its culmination, its final consequence, is annihilation. So the Maharal, in the parallel that's similar in the Bavli, is saying from Avodah Zarah 18b that when a person is mocking, he embraces emptiness and negates his very being, and he loses the fortitude to actually repel afflictions, and suffering is going to debilitate him and complete his ruin. So the Gemara continues and says, its inception is infliction, as is written. So now do not scoff, lest your afflictions grow severe. This is also in Yeshayahu, in the same verse, in 28:22. And the Gemara continues, says, and its culmination, its final consequence, basically, is annihilation, as is written later in the verse. It says, for a total annihilation have I heard from my Lord Elohim, Master of Legions, concerning the entire land. And in this, the prophet is basically warning the people not to indulge in further Yitzniut, which is cynicism, and is avoiding severe afflictions and even annihilation. And the people would do well basically to adopt an attitude that is the opposite of cynicism, and that it's trying to bring in a new attitude of submission and reverence. And that's what happens when you are cynical. And all through these four stories, are hints about the kinds of derech eretz that we need to develop, and which Torah scholars do develop, and things about really trying to stay away from joking around and cynicism, and that it can lead to your own demise.